Welcome back to the deep dive. We're doing something a little dangerous to start things off today. I want to ask you to conjure up a memory that might be a little painful. I want you to go back to a freshman college classroom.
Oh, no.
Hard wooden seats, the smell of chalk, a professor droning on at the front of the room. Specifically, I want you to imagine an Economics 101 class.
Oh, you are trying to lose the audience in the first 30 seconds. That's a bold strategy.
Bear with me, because there is a specific image I want to pull out of that memory. It's a graph. It's in every single textbook. It's usually called the indifference map. Does that ring a bell?
It rings a bell for me, but, I actually enjoy this stuff. For most normal people, this is usually the moment they decide to switch majors to English literature.
Right. But just stick with the image for a second. You have this L-shaped graph. On one side, the vertical axis, you've got income, cold, hard cash.
And on the bottom, the horizontal, you've got leisure, so vacation days.
And there are these graceful, curved lines swooping through the middle. And the professor stands there and tells you with absolute certainty that every single point on that curve is equal.
Utility, they call it. The idea is that you are perfectly happy trading money for time or time for money as long as you stay on that line. You're indifferent. You don't care.
And it looks so clean, doesn't it? It looks like physics. It implies that human desire is this calculable, smooth curve. It's been taught for 100 years. But the source material we are digging into today, chapter 27 of a book that really shook the foundations of this stuff, says that this graph is basically a lie.
Or at least a profound misunderstanding. Theory-induced blindness. That's the term the author uses. The graph isn't just a simplification. It's actively blinding us to how people actually behave.
Because it's missing the most important variable in the entire equation. It treats you like a robot that just calculates total wealth versus total time, but it ignores where you are standing right now.
It ignores the reference point.
Exactly.
Which is, it turns out, everything. In the real world, you don't really care about your total utility state. You care about changes. You care about gains. And, much more importantly, you care about losses.
That is what we are unpacking today. We are doing a deep dive into something called the Endowment Effect and the psychology of loss aversion. We're going to find out why you hoard old clothes you never wear, why you refuse to sell losing stocks, and why the rational agent, that perfectly logical creature that economists invented, is a total myth.
And we're going to do it with some really interesting props. We've got a stubborn D of a business school, some cheap coffee mugs, and a convention hall full of baseball card traders.
So let's start there, with the flaw in the map. The source material calls this Bernoulli's error redux. Now, without getting too bogged down in the 18th century math, what is the fundamental mistake the standard model makes?
The mistake is assuming that history doesn't matter. The standard economic model, the one that draws those nice, clean indifference curves, assumes that your happiness is determined solely by the state of things.
Okay, what do you mean by the state?
So if I say to you, right now you have $50,000 in the bank and 3 weeks of vacation, the model assumes there's a fixed amount of happiness, of utility, attached to that sentence.
Okay, that sounds plausible, though. I mean, $50,000 is $50,000.
But is it? Let me give you two different versions of yesterday. In version A, yesterday you had $100,000 in the bank, and you lost half of it in a really bad investment. Now you have $50,000.
Ouch. Okay.
In version B, yesterday you had $5,000 in the bank, and you won a lottery for $45,000. Now you have $50,000.
Right.
In both cases, the state is identical. You have 50 grand. But are you equally happy?
No, not even close. In version A, I'm devastated. I'm suicidal. In version B, I'm buying rounds for the whole bar.
Exactly. But the standard graph, the one we've been teaching students for a century, it can't see the difference. It only sees the endpoint. It is blind to the reference point where you started from.
It seems so obvious when you say it like that. Why did economists ignore this for so long? I mean, it feels like basic human nature.
Because the math is just so much easier if you ignore it. It's clean. If you have to account for everyone's personal history and their emotional baggage and their reference point, the equations get incredibly messy. So they just made an assumption. They said, over time, people are rational. They look at the bottom line.
But we aren't rational. We are, as you said, emotional historians. And the source material illustrates this perfectly with a great thought experiment. It involves two guys, Albert and Ben. I want to really get into this because it just completely exposes why that indifference curve is nonsense in the real world.
Let's do it. The tale of the hedonic twins.
So meet Albert and Ben. They are identical in every way that matters to an economist. Same skills, same tastes, same laziness level, the whole nine yards. And they start at the exact same job.
Right. Let's say they're entry-level coders. They make okay money. They get okay vacation time. They're at the exact same reference point. They're standing on the same spot on that map.
Then the company reorganizes. They come to the twins and say, we have two new positions opening up. Both are promotions. Position A is a $10,000 raise.
And position B is an extra 12 days of paid vacation.
Okay, so money versus time, the classic trade-off.
And because Albert and Ben are identical, and because these two offers are theoretically equal in value according to that indifference curve, they don't really care which one they get. They're indifferent.
So they could just flip a coin.
They flip a coin. Let's say Albert gets the raise, position A. Ben gets the vacation, position B.
Now here is where the theory-induced blindness kicks in. The standard theory says, okay, the experiment is over. Albert is happy with his money. Ben is happy with his time. They're on equal footing, just on a different point on the same curve.
But the story keeps going. A year passes. Albert gets used to that extra 10 grand. Maybe he buys a slightly nicer car, gets used to the payments. He feels like a $10K richer kind of guy.
And Ben, on the other hand, gets used to taking every other Friday off. He joins a hiking club, he plans long weekends, he feels like a lots of free time kind of guy.
Exactly. They have adjusted. Their reference points have shifted. Albert is now the guy with money. Ben is the guy with time.
And now the company comes back, maybe it's an HR mix-up, who knows, and says, hey, would you guys like to switch? No transaction costs. Albert, you can have the 12 vacation days if you give up the $10,000 raise. Ben, you can have the raise if you give up the vacation.
Now, stop and think like a rational agent for a second. Standard theory says they were indifferent a year ago. Their tastes haven't changed. The offers haven't changed. Logic dictates they should be perfectly willing to switch. In fact, they should be barely able to decide. It should be a toss-up.
But I'm putting myself in Albert's shoes right now, and I'm thinking, give up my raise.
Exactly.
My first thought is, wait, I need that 10 grand. I have car payments. I have plans for that money. Taking a pay cut, that sounds awful. The fact that I'm getting vacation days in return feels weak. It doesn't balance out the sting of the pay cut.
And Ben is thinking the exact same thing, just in reverse. Give up my Fridays. Are you kidding me? I live for those Fridays. That's my identity now. Sure, the money would be nice, but I can't lose my time.
So neither of them switches. They are stuck. They dig in their heels.
This is the endowment effect in action. Albert owns the salary. Ben owns the vacation. And the psychology of giving up what you own is fundamentally different from the psychology of getting something new.
It all comes down to the weighting of gains versus losses, right?
Yeah. Let's look at the math of Albert's brain again. To switch, he gets a gain. That's the vacation days. But he also suffers a loss, the salary. And humans are wired, evolutionarily wired, to treat losses as much more significant than gains.
How much more significant? Is there a number?
There is. And it's shockingly consistent. It's roughly twice as significant. We'll get to the specific numbers later with the experiments. But as a general rule, the pain of losing $100 is twice as intense as the pleasure of finding $100.
Which explains why Albert feels like the trade is a complete ripoff. To him, giving up $10,000 in salary feels like a $20,000 emotional hit. The vacation days, the gain, only feel like a $10,000 benefit. So of course he says no, the math doesn't add up in his head.
Exactly. The trade feels inequitable because of this loss aversion. And this is the fundamental reason the indifference map is wrong. It assumes you can just slide back and forth on that curve effortlessly. But in reality, once you land on a spot, you dig in, you get stuck. The status quo has a magnetic pull.
It's interesting you mention evolutionary wiring. It makes so much sense, doesn't it? If I'm a caveman and I find a few extra berries, that's nice. It's a good day.
A small gain.
But if I lose my stash of berries, my endowment, that's not a small loss. That means I die. That's a catastrophe.
Precisely. Organisms that treated threats more seriously than opportunities tended to survive and pass on their genes. We are the descendants of the paranoid and the protective. We are the descendants of the hoarders.
So this brings us to the guy who actually started connecting these dots. Because for decades, economists were drawing these smooth curves and just ignoring the fact that real people act like Albert and Ben. Enter Richard Thaler.
The rebel of Rochester.
I love the description of him in the source material. It's the early 1970s. He's a graduate student at the University of Rochester, and he's basically just annoying his professors by pointing out all the ways their beautiful theories don't work in the real world.
He was collecting anomalies, That was his hobby. He had a list on his blackboard of things people did that were irrational, according to standard economics. And his favorite example, his prize specimen, came from his own department, a man we'll call Professor R.
Later revealed to be Richard Rosette, who was the dean of the University of Chicago Business School. I mean, you can't get more establishment economics than that.
No, you absolutely cannot. The University of Chicago is the temple of the rational market, the home of Milton Friedman. But even the high priest had a vice. He loved wine.
So break down the Professor R anomaly for us, because on the surface, it just sounds like a guy who likes his wine. What's so irrational about that?
It's all about the massive gap between his buying price and his selling price.
Huh.
So Professor R would go to auctions to buy old wine for his cellar. But he was a prudent man, a good economist. He had a strict rule. He would never, ever pay more than $35 for a bottle of wine.
Okay, so that establishes his willingness to pay. In his mind, a bottle of wine, no matter how good, is not worth more than $35 of his hard-earned cash. That is its value.
Correct. That's what a rational agent would conclude. But here's the thing. He had been collecting for a long time. Some of the bottles in his cellar had appreciated massively in value. They were now worth $100, maybe more, on the open market.
Right, so dealers would come calling.
Dealers would contact him. They'd say, Professor R, I have a buyer who wants that bottle of whatever. I will give you $100 for it, cash, right now.
And a rational agent, someone who believes that exact bottle is worth, at most, $35, should scream, yes, right.
A rational agent should have sold it immediately. Think about it. If you think a stock is worth $35 and someone offers you $100 for it, you sell. You take the profit. You'd be crazy not to. But Professor R refused. He would never sell a single bottle from his collection.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Maybe he just really liked the wine. Maybe he just wanted to drink it someday. Is that irrational?
It is. If you look at the math, at the opportunity cost. If he decides to drink that bottle, he's consuming something that he could have sold for $100.
Ah, okay.
So, objectively, drinking that bottle costs him $100. That's $100 he's choosing not to have in his pocket. But remember, this is a man who refuses to buy an identical bottle for $36. So he is saying at the exact same time, I would not pay $36 for this experience, and I am happy to spend $100 on this experience.
And when you put it that way, it is a complete contradiction. He's acting like the wine is worth two completely different prices depending on whether it's on his shelf or on the auction block.
Exactly. If he didn't own it, it was worth less than $35. The second it was in his cellar, the second he endowed himself with it, it was suddenly worth more than $100. The mere act of possession tripled its value in his mind.
And Thaler saw this and said, this isn't just a quirk. This isn't just about wine. This is fundamental.
He realized that the standard theory of consumer choice was missing a term. It wasn't just about the utility of getting the wine, it was about the pain of giving it up. If Professor R buys a bottle, he feels the pain of paying $35. But if he sells a bottle, he feels the pain of losing the bottle. And because the pain of loss is so much stronger than the pain of payment, he freezes. He keeps the wine.
It's the exact same logic as the hedonic twins. He's Albert with the car. I'm not giving this up, even if the math says I should.
And this realization, which Thaler eventually connected to the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky and their prospect theory, that was the spark that really lit the fire of behavioral economics. It was the moment they realized that ownership isn't just a legal state. It's a psychological state that changes how our neurons fire.
But of course, anecdotes about wine-drinking professors are one thing. You can't build a whole new science on stories, no matter how good they are. You need hard data. You need control groups. You need a lab.
You do. And that leads us to the most famous coffee mugs in the history of social science.
The Cornell experiments.
Right. So Kahneman, Thaler, and another researcher, Jack Netsch, they all teamed up. They wanted to prove this wasn't just about wine snobs or expensive goods. They wanted to show it happened with cheap, everyday items. But first, they had to do something really important. They had to prove the market worked normally when emotions weren't involved.
The control group, they used tokens.
Yes. They used these methods that were developed by Vernon Smith, who later won a Nobel for this stuff. They handed out tokens to students in a classroom. These were just slips of paper or plastic chips. They had no intrinsic value. You couldn't use them. But the experimenter said, if you are holding this token at the end of the hour, I will give you $5. Or some specific cash value.
So these are what they call exchange goods. They're just proxies for money. They exist only to be traded.
Exactly. And when they let the students trade these tokens, The market was perfect. It was beautiful. The invisible hand that Adam Smith talked about, it worked. Supply and demand balanced out perfectly. Yeah. The number of trades was exactly what the mathematical theory predicted.
Because nobody falls in love with a token. You don't look at a slip of paper and say, oh, I love the way this feels in my hand. It has sentimental value to me.
Right. There is no endowment effect for currency or for things that are just stand-ins for currency. So once they established that the students were smart and they understood how to trade in a market, they introduced the used goods, university coffee mugs.
Set the scene for us. What did this look like?
It's a classroom at Cornell. Half the students, chosen completely at random, are given a mug. It's sitting right there on their desk. The experimenters say, this is yours. You own it. You can take it home with you.
The other half gets nothing.
The other half of the students get nothing. They just sit there looking at the mugs on their neighbors' desks. So completely at random, we have created sellers, the mug owners, and buyers, the people who might want a mug.
Now, let's apply the rational agent theory here. Since the mugs were handed out randomly, there's no reason to think the sellers as a group like mugs more than the buyers as a group.
None whatsoever. Maybe I hate coffee, but I got a mug. Maybe you love coffee, but you didn't get one. We should trade. In fact, the theory predicts that about half the mugs should be traded. The people who don't really want them should sell them to the people who do.
That makes perfect sense. It should be a flurry of activity as the market finds its equilibrium.
But that's not what happened at all. The market basically died. It ground to a halt. Very, very few trades happened. And when they looked at the prices people were writing down, the gap was just staggering.
This is the willingness to pay versus the willingness to accept again, just like with the wine.
Precisely. The buyers, the people without mugs, they looked at the mug and said, hey, it looks like a nice mug. I'd pay about $2.87 for it. That was the average.
Okay, under $3.
But the sellers, the people who had owned this mug for literally 5 minutes, they said, I'm not parting with this precious item for less than $7.12.
That is massive. It's more than double. It's almost 2.5 times as much.
It's a chasm. The buyers see a piece of ceramic worth $3. The sellers see a cherished possession worth $7. They are looking at the exact same object, but they are living in completely different psychological realities.
Now, I can hear the skeptics, because I'm one of them, saying, well, maybe the sellers just liked the mug. Maybe just by chance, the mug lovers ended up in the sellers group. Or maybe owning it made them appreciate its quality.
An excellent objection. And that is exactly why they did a third variation of the experiment. This, to me, is the smoking gun. If you ever doubt the endowment effect, you have to look at the choosers.
Okay, break it down. Who are the choosers?
They took a third group of students. They didn't give them a mug, but they didn't make them buyers either. Instead, they said, on this form in front of you, you can choose to receive a mug, or you can choose to receive a sum of cash. And they had to indicate at what price point they would prefer the cash over the mug.
So let's stop and look at the state of the world again like we did with the twins. If you are a seller, you are going to walk out of that room with either a mug or money. If you are a chooser, you are going to walk out of that room with either a mug or money. Financially, their situation is identical.
It is exactly identical. The future is the same for both groups. The only difference is the past. It's the reference point. The seller has the mug and has to experience the pain of giving it up. The chooser doesn't have the mug and just has to decide which gain they prefer.
So if it was just about how cool the mug is, how much objective utility it provides, the choosers and the sellers should value it the same.
Correct. But they didn't. Not even close. The choosers said the mug was worth about $3.12.
Wow. Basically the same as the buyers?
Almost identical to the buyers, who were at $2.87. But the sellers, they were still way up at $7.12.
So the choosers, who could have had the mug for free just by checking a box, said, nah, I'd rather have $3.50. But the sellers wouldn't take $7 for it.
It proves pretty conclusively that the high price wasn't because the mug was awesome. It was because giving it up hurt. That $4 gap between the choosers and the sellers, that is the pain tax of loss aversion.
The source material mentions brain imaging here, which I find is fascinating. This isn't just stubbornness or a negotiating tactic. This is neurology.
Yes. In later studies, when they put people in fMRI machines and asked them to consider selling things they owned, the parts of the brain that lit up weren't the logical, calculating parts in the prefrontal cortex. It was the insula.
The insula, what does that do? I've never heard of it.
It's a very primal part of the brain. It's associated with disgust and pain. It's the part of your brain that fires when you smell rotten meat or when you anticipate a physical blow. Selling that mug, losing that possession, literally registers as pain to the brain.
So when the seller says $7.12, they aren't trying to rip you off. They're trying to find a price that is high enough to compensate themselves for the neural pain of the loss.
Exactly. The ratio is usually about 2.1. To get me to suffer the pain of losing 1 util of satisfaction, you have to pay me 2 utils of pleasure. And this 2.1 ratio appears all over the place. In how people react to price changes for orange juice or eggs, it's a surprisingly stable feature of our minds.
It paints a picture of humans as, well, kind of pathetic, honestly. We're like toddlers. Mine.
We are. The text makes that comparison explicitly. You know how a baby will hold on to a toy, and if you try to take it, they scream and get agitated, even if they weren't even playing with it a second ago?
Oh, yeah. My nephew does that all the time.
That is the endowment effect in its rawest, purest form. We are biologically wired to protect our resources. In a world of scarcity, which is where we evolved, holding on to what you have is a really good survival strategy. In a modern economy, it just makes us irrational traders.
But wait a minute. We do trade things. I go to the grocery store. I buy clothes. I sell my old car. We aren't paralyzed by loss aversion all the time, so there have to be exceptions to this rule.
There are. And the exceptions are just as important as the rule because they tell us when the effect turns on and off. Think about the shoes on your feet. You bought them. You handed over money. Did you feel a surge of pain when you gave the cashier the money?
Not really. I mean, nobody loves spending money, but I didn't feel loss. I felt like I was making a purchase, an exchange.
Right. And the store owner. Did they cry when you walked out the door with their precious shoes?
No, they were happy to see me go.
Why? Why no endowment effect in that transaction? It's because for both of you, the goods were held for exchange. The money in your pocket is not a use good. You don't frame a $20 bill and admire it on your wall. Its only purpose is to be traded, so you don't form an emotional attachment to it.
And for the store owner, the shoes are just inventory. They're a proxy for cash.
Exactly. So if you view the item as something to be traded, the spell is broken, the brain doesn't fire those pain signals in the insula. And this leads to a really cool question. Can you train yourself to think like a store owner? Can you learn to turn off the endowment effect?
The Jedi mind trick of behavioral economics.
Well, an economist named John List, who loves doing experiments out in the real world, decided to test this. He didn't go to a university lab with undergrads. He went to the jungle. He went to a baseball card convention.
A place where value is everything and it's constantly being debated.
And a place where you have a perfect mix of people. You have the novices, the casual collectors who just love their cards. They have sentimental value. And you have the dealers, the sharks, the guys who buy and sell thousands of cards a month for a living.
So List runs a version of the endowment experiment on them.
He does. He gives them a choice between a mug and a candy bar, or similar items he brought with him. He gives one to them, and then a little later asks if they'd like to trade for the other. He tests their willingness to trade. The novices. They acted exactly like the Cornell students. If you gave them a mug, they kept the mug. If you gave them a candy bar, they kept the candy bar.
They got endowed.
Instantly. Only about 18% of them were willing to trade. Loss aversion was running the show. But the dealers, the experienced traders, the endowment effect completely vanished.
What was their trade percentage?
48%, which is basically 50%. That is perfect economic rationality. They were completely indifferent.
They were immune.
They were cured by experience. Their brains had literally been rewired by thousands of transactions. When a novice looks at a mug, their brain asks, how much will it hurt to lose this mug? But when a dealer looks at a mug, their brain asks, what is the trade value of this mug compared to the trade value of the candy? They have learned to treat everything like a token, like a poker chip.
That is incredibly hopeful, actually. It means we aren't slaves to our biology. We can learn to override that mind instinct if we practice enough.
You can, but there is a darker side to this immunity. There's another group of people who don't show the endowment effect. And it's not because they are expert traders. It's because they are poor.
This was the section of the source material that really stopped me in my tracks. Decision-making under poverty.
It is a profound and, frankly, heartbreaking insight. The researchers found that people living in genuine poverty, people struggling to make rent, struggling to buy food, they do not display the endowment effect in these kinds of experiments.
Why not? You'd think they would hold onto things even tighter because they have so little to begin with.
You might think that, but you have to go back to the idea of the reference point. The endowment effect happens when you are more or less comfortable. You have a status quo, a baseline, and you don't want to drop below it. But the poor are living below their reference point. They are, as the text says, always in the losses.
What does that mean for their day-to-day decision-making?
It means that for a person in poverty, nothing is really a gain in the psychological sense that we feel it. If they get an extra $10, it's not, yay, bonus money, I can buy something fun. It's just a slightly smaller loss than yesterday. It's a temporary reprieve. They're just trying to get back to zero.
And when they spend money?
This is the absolute key. For you or me, if we buy a $5 coffee, it's a transaction. We trade money, which is an exchange good, for a pleasure, which is a use good. For a person living in poverty, all costs are losses.
How so?
If they spend $5 on that coffee, that is $5 they cannot spend on dinner for their kids or on the bus fare to get to work. The opportunity cost isn't some abstract economic concept. It's immediate and painful. Every choice is a choice between two losses.
So they are effectively traders by necessity. They're constantly weighing one survival need against another, just like the baseball card dealers weigh a mug against a candy bar.
Exactly. They don't have the luxury of loss aversion because everything is already a loss. They are constantly making these painful trades. If I pay the electric bill, I lose the grocery money. If I buy medicine, I lose the rent money. So they don't show the bias, but for the saddest possible reason, they're already at maximum pain sensitivity.
It really reframes how we judge the decisions of the poor. You know, sometimes you hear people say, oh, why don't they save more? Why are they so short-term focused? But if you are living in the loss domain of the value function, your brain is firing differently. You're in pure survival mode.
Absolutely. The stress of those constant trade-offs depletes cognitive resources. It's not irrationality, it's exhaustion.
Let's give it to one final application because this is a big one. We've talked about small things like mugs and wine, but does this psychological quirk affect the big stuff, like the biggest purchase most of us will ever make in our lives? Real estate.
The housing market. This is where the endowment effect stops being a cute psychological quirk you read about in a book and starts costing people their life savings.
The text cites a really compelling study of the Boston condo market during a downturn. Now, downturn is the key word here. Prices are dropping.
Right, so imagine you have two neighbors. They live in identical condos, same floor plan, same view. Neighbor A bought his unit back in the 90s for $200,000. Neighbor B bought his unit at the absolute peak of the market for $300,000.
And now the recession hits. The market value, the realistic price they can get today for their identical condos, is $250,000.
So functionally, they're in the exact same boat. They own a box in the sky that's worth $250 grand. If they want to sell, a rational agent would say they should both list at $250,000 or maybe a little bit higher for negotiation.
A rational agent would say, the price you paid in the past is irrelevant. It's a sunk cost. The market is the market.
But neighbor A, the one who bought low, he looks at $250,000 and sees a game. Hey, I made 50 grand. That's great. He lists the house, sells it quickly, and moves on with his life.
But neighbor B...
Neighbor B is staring at a loss, a $50,000 loss. If I sell for $250,000, I lose $50,000. And his brain, his insula, screams, no, pain, danger. So what does he do?
He sets a higher price. He says, I'm not taking less than $300,000. I need to break even.
He anchors his selling price to his original purchase price, his reference point. And the result is a disaster. The condo sits on the market. Nobody buys it because it's overpriced. It sits there for a year. He keeps paying the mortgage, the property taxes, the maintenance fees. In the end, he usually sells for less than $250,000 because the listing becomes stale and buyers think something is wrong with it.
He loses more money trying to avoid admitting he lost money.
That is the tragedy of loss aversion.
Okay.
It blinds us to the present reality because we are so focused on redeeming the past, we refuse to realize the loss on paper, and so we let it fester and grow in the real world.
We see this in the stock market all the time too, right? There's a name for it, the disposition effect.
Oh, all the time. It's one of the most documented biases in finance. People sell their winning stocks way too early because they want to lock in the gain and get that little jolt of pleasure. It feels good. But they hold on to their losing stocks way, way too long.
They ride them all the way down to zero.
They do. They act like, well, it's not a loss until I sell. They keep hoping it will bounce back to their purchase price so they can just break even and not have to face the pain of admitting they were wrong. It's the same mechanism. Don't make me admit my endowment has lost value.
So we've covered a lot of ground. We've debunked the indifference map. We've met Albert and Ben. We've analyzed the mugs and the wine. We've looked at the tragedy of poverty and the stubbornness of homeowners. What is the big overarching takeaway? If the listener takes one thing from this deep dive, what should it be?
I think the big takeaway is that value is not a fixed property of the object out there in the world. It is a property of the relationship between you and the object. The mug is not worth $3 or $7. The mug is worth $3 if you don't have it and $7 if you do. You are not an objective observer of the world. You are a participant. And your history, your reference point, colors every single decision you make.
And realizing that is the first step to freedom, isn't it? It's like seeing the Matrix.
It is. Once you know that your brain is lying to you,
Yeah.
that it is artificially inflating the value of what you already own just to avoid the sensation of pain, you can start to question it.
Yeah.
You can build a little distance.
You can try to be the baseball card dealer, not the novice collector.
Exactly. You can look at that shirt you haven't worn in 3 years, the one taking up space in your closet, and ask a simple question. If I were in a store today and this shirt was on the rack, would I pay money to buy it? And if the answer is no, then you need to get rid of it. You're only keeping it because of the endowment effect.
That's a powerful heuristic. Would I buy this today? I want to leave our listener with a final thought to chew on, a bit of a challenge. We all have mugs in our lives. And I don't just mean clutter in the garage. I mean ideas we've invested in. I mean relationships that aren't working. I mean projects at work that are going nowhere.
The sunk cost fallacy, another close cousin of this.
Exactly. So think about something you are holding on to tightly right now. Something that is causing you stress or costing you resources or just not bringing you joy. Are you holding on to it because it has a genuinely bright future? Or are you holding on to it because the idea of letting go, of admitting the loss, of changing your status quo feels too painful to contemplate? Are you acting like a rational adult making a forward-looking decision? Or are you Albert, refusing to trade the car? Or are you the baby, clutching the toy just because it's yours?
That is the question. The sunk cost is gone. The past is history. All that matters is the future. Can you let go of the mug?
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.